Hi, I'm Carrie Lee Merritt, and welcome to another episode of Meritocracy. Today I'm here with Sara Patenaude, and she is an affordable housing researcher and advocate, a job she's been working on since 2012, many years. Her current position is as project manager at Tapestry Development Group, and she works exclusively with affordable housing right now. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Sara.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Now, Sara has a PhD in history, but as you can see, has transitioned out of academe and into the real world, for lack of better words. So tell us a little bit about your PhD, though. You studied Baltimore, right?
I did. Yes, so for my PhD, I was studying affordable housing policy, specifically public housing in Baltimore, looking at the rhetoric of choice and how public housing officials were able to use language about choice to avoid having to be responsible for desegregation of public housing projects in that city.
So a lot that's applicable to where we are now. Sara lives in Atlanta as well. And you're using that kind of knowledge that you gained from the dissertation, from the PhD, and applying it to real world knowledge right now. So what was that transition like out of academe?
Yes. Well, I went into a PhD knowing that I didn't want to be in academia. That was not my ultimate goal. But at first I thought I was going to work in museums or be a curator, do something related to public history.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was working on my dissertation and learning more and more about how city planning history affects current affordable housing problems, that got me interested in helping make new affordable housing policy.
Right.
So for a little while, I worked for a city of Hapeville, which is a small city near the airport, in their economic development department. Then I went on to work for a consulting firm where we consulted on commercial and residential real estate, helping understand markets, understand where the market wants housing or retail or office supply to go. And then as I was considering what I wanted my next step to be, I really wanted to be kind of in the thick of it with development. Because my game plan is that we need policymakers who understand how affordable housing is actually built. And the way to do that is to help develop it. So I started my current position at Tapestry about 4 months ago, and we work exclusively on affordable housing. We are a nonprofit, and we specialize in affordable housing creation and preservation and permanent supportive housing, where we pair affordable housing with supportive services for people with disabilities, including mental health challenges or people experiencing homelessness.
That's fantastic. And not only does Sara work within Atlanta and Georgia, but really all over the South, because so many of the problems in southern cities are similar.
Exactly. Yes, we see residual effects of racism and the ways that played out both in politics and in city planning. And that's still having effects today, especially in cities like Atlanta.
And we're going to have a nice little roundtable a little bit later with King Williams, who works a lot on city planning, gentrification, different topics like that. But what do you see as Atlanta's biggest problem with affordable housing right now?
The biggest problem with affordable housing in Atlanta right now is that there's just not enough housing. So there's some people that think that if we just built all market rate housing, that would solve the problem. That's not true. But at the same time, not building enough market rate housing along with building not enough affordable housing is what's causing the crunch. And of course, if you don't have enough housing, the people with the most money can always afford it, and that reverberates down. So in Atlanta, we have people with middle incomes also having trouble finding housing they can afford. And again, that has racial implications because of how segregated Atlanta is as a city.
Right, and then you add into that our terrible infrastructure with regards to virtually no good system of public transportation. And when you have the fact that all of these poor working class and even middle class population cannot live within the city limits anymore, I mean, what is this going to look like if we don't do something about it?
It's going to look like a lot of people spending most of their money on housing. So we talk about housing as housing affordability as cost burden. So if you are spending more than 30% of your household income on housing, then you're considered to be cost burdened. And those numbers are astronomical in the city of Atlanta, and even the metro area as a whole. But the next number that we consider is severe cost burden. So you're spending more than half of your household income on housing, and that number is continuing to grow. So that there are many families in and around Atlanta who are having to make choices based on, what electric bills they can pay, what food they can afford, if they can pay their student loan debt, all of these kinds of decisions because they're having to pay these skyrocketing rents.
Right. And just from living in the city for so many years and knowing so many friends of mine who have struggled with this issue, what you have, because there's such a scarcity of housing, is that landlords and they're mainly these big corporations that own, apartment complexes, they raise the rent each year.
Absolutely.
Each year. And so you've got a population of people that are constantly having to move each year in order to just try to keep their expenses, at something they can afford.
Right. And if you consider that right now the average rent for an apartment in Atlanta is $1,600 a month. There are very few households that could pay that without having to feel some kind of crunch. But especially as you're looking to families that, even if it's two income earners that are making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, that's unaffordable.
Right. And so what kinds of things do you think that we can do at a political level, whether that's local, state? What can we do to help change this?
Sure. So the city of Atlanta is starting to do some things. They are rewriting the zoning code to allow more density inside the city. That's a huge piece of this. One of the leading factors to housing not being affordable has to do with zoning. So if all you can build is a single family house on 1 acre, that means that it's going to be more expensive. The taxes are going to be higher, and you're going to be able to put fewer of them in a city. So the city of Atlanta is trying to address that by allowing mixed densities, and especially around transit. The next piece that we can do to help with housing affordability is actually not even housing related, it's transit related. Because as you said, costs are not just about how much you pay in rent. It's also about how you get around the city. And once you add in housing affordability and rents with transportation costs, the city of Atlanta is actually the 6th least affordable metro in the country.
Wow.
So we think about Atlanta as having affordable housing, but most of that is in far-flung areas where you can't get public transit.
Right.
And then the third piece around this is really about utility costs. So right now in the city of Atlanta, we're dealing with, in the state of Georgia, we're dealing with possible rate increases from Georgia Power. So we have to have political leaders that are willing to stand up for their constituents and say, this is going to make it unaffordable for people to live here.
Right.
And it's going to have real impacts on their lives.
So much at stake here as we're going into the next election cycle, and really questions to think about from all of our representatives, questions to be asking, because this is untenable the way it's going right now.
Exactly.
Do politicians that you have been working with recently, do they realize that we've got to fix transportation in order to fix housing?
Some of them do.
Okay.
I think one of the things that makes me feel really good about the future of this field and the affordable housing need is that we're starting to break down these silos. So in the policy world, of course, you have your housing people, you have your economic development people, you have your transportation people, and they don't usually talk to each other very well. But when it comes to housing affordability, people are starting to realize that affects transportation, utilities, school systems, all of these different pieces that feed into the affordable housing puzzle. So I think most politicians are starting to realize that, and most policymakers, but it gets really difficult because it's one thing to say, that we need to have housing that's affordable. It's getting people to actually, vote for MARTA expansion or be willing to pay extra in sales taxes to support that is a different kind of question.
Right. So what it sounds like to me too is that we need more PhDs, we need more experts about kind of macro level issues, how things work, change over time, all the things that historians particularly are very well trained in order to be able to explain to people how all of these issues are interrelated.
Absolutely. One of the things I realized when I was working for the consulting firm is that often we had cities that would come to us with a problem, and they would say, we think that this is our problem, can you please solve it? And using our research skills, and especially using my skills as a historian, to unpack that research question and say, is that even really the problem that needs to be solved? And that only really comes from liberal arts education. You can't learn that in a STEM field.
Wow. Well, we're here with Dr. Sara Patenaude, and stay tuned for some more from Meritocracy.